Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone close to you and thought, "Why do I feel so small around you?" Not angry, not scared, just drained, like your spirit walked out of the room long before you did. Maybe it was the way they laughed at your ambition, or how they twisted your truth until you began questioning your own memory. Maybe it was their silence, loud enough to make your chest tighten, yet subtle enough that no one else seemed to notice. And you started asking yourself a quiet, aching question: is it me? If that question has ever lived in your chest, this video is for you. Because today, we're not just identifying toxic behaviors. We're walking straight into the fire of them. We're naming what others won't. And we're doing it not to hate, not to accuse, but to reclaim your time, your worth, your inner clarity. The Stoics believe that peace isn't given, it's protected. Seneca wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you." And just beneath that wisdom is an unspoken truth. Some people are not just misaligned with your peace, they are predators of it. But here's the real danger. These behaviors often come dressed in concern, in charm, in love. They don't show up with warning labels. They show up with smiles. That's why they're so damaging. And that's why recognizing them is a spiritual act of self-respect. Today's video will help you see what you've been tolerating for too long. The subtle manipulations, the veiled criticisms, the passive poisons that have no business living in your life any longer. Because this isn't just about removing toxic people. It's about remembering who you were before you absorbed their distortions. It's about stepping back into the power of self-possession with clarity, with dignity, and with that stoic strength that doesn't shout, but never bows. If you've ever walked out of a conversation feeling smaller, sadder, or more confused than when you walked in, then you're not overreacting. You're awakening. This video is your mirror, your sword, your invitation to clean the house of your soul. If this message resonates, I'd be honored if you'd like this video, subscribe to Stoic Now, and join this growing circle of people choosing presence over performance and truth over toxicity. Now take a breath. This won't be easy, but it will be worth it. Let's begin the journey inward. Emotional manipulation. You sit across from them, coffee warm in your hand, trust still fresh in your eyes, and they tell you a story. A story about how their ex was cold, about the job that never appreciated them, about the family that never believed in their worth. And in that moment, you feel it, compassion, maybe even admiration. You think, this person is so open, so real. Maybe I can be the one who doesn't hurt them. But weeks pass, then months, and a pattern begins to form. Every disagreement becomes an accusation. Every boundary you set is met with guilt. Every time you speak your truth, somehow, you end up apologizing. This is not love. This is emotional manipulation. It is, perhaps, one of the most corrosive toxins that can seep into a relationship, not because it yells, but because it whispers. It disguises itself in softness, in neediness, in a carefully crafted narrative where they are always the one being hurt, and you are always the one to blame. According to psychologists, this dynamic often falls into the realm of gaslighting, a subtle form of psychological abuse where a person distorts your reality until you question your memory, your perception, and eventually, your sanity. They don't break you with cruelty, they break you with confusion. Epictetus warned us long ago, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. But what if the provocation is so well disguised, you no longer know where their needs end and your responsibility begins? This is the paradox of emotional manipulation. It's not always malicious in intention. Sometimes, the manipulator is wounded themselves, operating from fear, from scarcity, from a desperate need to control their environment because they've never known safety. But their trauma is not your responsibility to absorb. Let me tell you about Daniel. Daniel was one of the most emotionally aware men I've ever known. Kind-hearted, a quiet thinker, a man who wanted, more than anything, to create a safe space for the woman he loved. And she was charming, beautiful in the kind of way that made strangers pause. But behind that beauty was a pattern, a deep well of unresolved wounds dressed as storytelling. At first, she confided in Daniel, how her past relationships were all full of betrayal, how her friends never truly got her, how her parents were distant. He held space for all of it. And slowly, he started adjusting, making himself smaller, reassuring her constantly, avoiding friends she didn't trust, changing his language so she wouldn't misinterpret his words. Until one day, he realized he no longer recognized himself. That's how emotional manipulation works. It doesn't slam doors. It rearranges your furniture while you're asleep, until your home no longer feels like your own. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. In emotionally manipulative relationships, that power is what you must reclaim. The power to discern, to say, "Your pain is valid, but your behavior is not my burden." So what do? You observe patterns, not performances. You notice how you feel after interactions, clear or confused, peaceful or pressured. You trust your gut, that silent philosopher living beneath your ribcage. And above all, you remember, real love doesn't leave you doubting your own mind. Real love clarifies, it does not cloud. When someone consistently makes you question your worth under the guise of care, you must stop asking, "How can I fix this?" and start asking, "Why am I tolerating this?" Because no matter how tender their voice, if their presence costs you your clarity, your peace, or your identity, it is not love. It is control, wrapped in concern. And the moment you see it, truly see it, is the moment you begin to rise. Passive aggressiveness. It's not always the words they use. It's the words they don't. The pause before the answer. The loaded "I'm fine." The smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. Passive aggressiveness is the art of conflict without confrontation. It's emotional warfare where the battlefield is invisible and the weapons are carefully disguised. Sighs instead of sentences, sarcasm instead of sincerity, silence instead of honesty. And yet, the damage it causes is no less real. It's the kind of behavior that leaves you questioning yourself. Did I offend them? Are they upset? Did I do something wrong? It makes you tiptoe, not walk. It teaches you to analyze, not speak. You stop showing up fully because you're too busy decoding their mood. Seneca once said, "He who is brave is free." But passive-aggressive behavior traps both parties. It robs the aggressor of authentic expression and the recipient of emotional safety. What makes this behavior especially toxic is its ambiguity. It lacks the clarity that Stoicism so deeply values. Stoics prize directness, not harshness, but honesty. Passive-aggressiveness hides behind ambiguity, giving the aggressor plausible deniability. They can say they were joking, say you're being too sensitive, say you're imagining things. But here's the truth. When communication becomes a guessing game, your peace becomes collateral damage. Take the story of Rachel, a woman who worked in a creative agency. She had a manager who never raised his voice, never gave direct feedback, but he'd leave cryptic comments on her reports, ignore her in meetings, congratulate her teammates by name, but simply say to her, "You did fine." When she tried to address it, he'd smile and say, "I don't know what you're talking about. Everything's good." Except it wasn't. Rachel knew it, felt it, but she couldn't prove it. That's the power of passive aggression. It makes you doubt what your soul already knows. This dynamic isn't limited to work. In relationships, it looks like emotional withdrawal instead of healthy disagreement. Like backhanded compliments. "Wow, you actually look good today." Or procrastinated favors with heavy sighs and guilt-laced silence. "Sure, I'll help you again." But here's the Stoic truth. Discomfort is not something to avoid, it's something to face. Epictetus reminds us, if someone does wrong, instruct them kindly. But if they will not listen, blame yourself no more. Passive-aggressive people often avoid confrontation because they fear rejection, vulnerability, or accountability. But in doing so, they poison the well of connection. If you're on the receiving end, it's not your job to fix their emotional illiteracy. It's your job to protect your mind, your time, your space. When you feel the sting of a veiled insult, respond not with defense, but with clarity. Ask calmly, "What did you mean by that?" Shine light where they hoped for shadows. You'll either bring out the truth or reveal their unwillingness to face it. But don't stoop to match their method. Stoic strength isn't about playing the same game better. It's about rising above the game entirely. When they weaponize silence, you practice calm. When they offer sarcasm, you respond with sincerity. You do not fight fire with fire. You dissolve it with presence. Because ultimately, this is not just about communication. It's about dignity. You deserve to exist in spaces where people speak truth, not in riddles that slowly unravel your peace. You deserve connection that is rooted in honesty, not wrapped in mystery and emotional punishment. And if someone cannot meet you with directness, then meet yourself with it. Choose your words with care. Speak your needs with strength. Hold your ground with grace. And know this: those who fear confrontation often create conflict in its absence. And your clarity? That's the boundary they didn't expect, but absolutely need. Constant criticism disguised as help. They say it with a smile. I'm only telling you this because I care. Don't take it the wrong way, but just being honest. And what follows? A remark that stings. A comment that shrinks. A subtle jab wrapped in the language of love. This is not feedback. This is erosion. Constant criticism disguised as help is perhaps one of the most deceptive forms of toxicity. It wears the mask of concern, but underneath lies control, envy, even resentment. And if you're not grounded in self-respect, you'll start mistaking their harshness for wisdom and their ego for guidance. Stoicism teaches us to welcome honest critique. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If anyone can refute me, show me I'm making a mistake or looking at things from the wrong perspective, I'll gladly change." But notice the word, refute. Not ridicule, not insult, not tear down. Constructive feedback uplifts. Even when it's firm, it's rooted in your potential. But destructive criticism? It diminishes. It cloaks itself in truth, but delivers it like a weapon, not a gift. Think of David. He was a talented musician, gentle soul, never one to boast. His older brother, Patrick, would always check in on his career, but the conversation never left David inspired. You should really be more realistic. Don't you think this music thing is just a phase? I'm not trying to discourage you. I just don't want you to be disappointed. Yet every time they spoke, David felt smaller. Not safer, not supported, just dimmed. This is the hidden cost of masked criticism. It doesn't just challenge your ideas, it corrodes your confidence. It trains you to distrust your inner compass. And the worst part? It often comes from people closest to us. Family, longtime friends, people who can't stand the idea of you rising beyond their emotional reach. As Epictetus warned, you become what you give your attention to. And if you constantly attend to voices that undermine your value, you will slowly absorb those beliefs as your own. But here's the truth. Someone who truly wants to help you doesn't humiliate you. They don't disguise control as mentorship. They don't whisper their doubts louder than your dreams. So how do you know the difference? Listen to your body. After you talk with them, do you feel more empowered or more hesitant? Does their truth leave you clearer or confused? Do you feel seen or scrutinized? And above all, ask this: do they offer solutions or just point out flaws? Because real guidance doesn't stop at pointing out the crack in the wall. It brings the tools to help you rebuild it. And if you're the one offering feedback, remember, tone is part of truth. Your honesty loses value when it's wrapped in superiority. The Stoics didn't teach with daggers, they taught with dignity. They didn't correct to elevate themselves, they did so to elevate the other. If someone repeatedly cloaks their insecurities in unsolicited advice, if they can't celebrate your wins without a warning label, if their concern feels more like a leash than a ladder, it's okay to create distance. You're not rejecting love, you're rejecting distortion. Seneca once said, "The whole future lies in uncertainty. Live immediately." And part of living immediately is no longer spending time decoding messages that were designed to confuse, not connect. You owe no one your silence in exchange for their disguised disdain. Speak your truth, value your progress, and remember, constructive words build character, but constant criticism? It chips away at the very foundation you've fought to build. Protect that foundation, and protect it with the same resolve you would defend a temple, because that's exactly what your soul is. Disrespect of boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors with locks, designed not to keep the world out, but to protect the peace within. Yet some people treat your boundaries not as lines to honor, but as obstacles to conquer. They push, they pry, they interpret your no as negotiable, your silence as permission, and your time as theirs to manage. And over time, if you're not vigilant, your life begins to feel like a home with no doors, everyone walking in, making noise, leaving their emotional mess, then exiting like nothing happened. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You must build a wall around your peace, not a door for every passerby." And that wall is your boundary. But when someone consistently disrespects it, When they call you at midnight and expect an answer, when they guilt trip you for needing space, when they overstep without apology and mask it as concern, that's not love. That's intrusion. This doesn't always come in grand acts of defiance. Most often, it arrives in the form of small things. The friend who jokes about your insecurities even after you've asked them to stop. The partner who checks your phone just to be sure. The colleague who keeps piling tasks on your plate, assuming you won't say no. Each act, by itself, might seem minor, but taken together, they're a pattern, a slow erosion of your sovereignty. Think of Claire. She had always been the reliable one. The one who stayed late at work, picked up the phone at 2 a.m., lent money without hesitation. She thought this made her kind, needed, loved, but what it really made her was exhausted. When Claire began saying no, she was met with shock, resistance, even accusations of selfishness. People around her weren't used to her having needs. They were used to her being the need meter, the emotional sponge, the peacekeeper. But as Epictetus reminds us, no person is free who is not master of themselves. And that mastery begins with setting boundaries and holding them, even when it's inconvenient for others. Disrespect of boundaries is a test, not of your relationships, but of your resolve. Because people will treat your limits the way you treat them. If you backtrack, they'll push further. If you over-explain, they'll argue. But when you stand firm, with calm, consistent clarity, they may not applaud you, but they will begin to understand. This space is not theirs to shape. So how do you hold your ground? Not with aggression, with alignment. You don't scream. You don't justify endlessly. You simply state what is true for you, and let that truth do the heavy lifting. I'm not available after 9 p.m. I'm not comfortable with that topic. This is something I need to do alone. These are not rude. They are respectful of yourself and the relationship. Because boundaries aren't rejections of others. They are affirmations of your inner order. They allow you to give freely, not resentfully. To show up fully, not fractured. And if someone takes offense to your boundary, it was never about connection. It was about control. Let them go. Gently, quietly, but without guilt. You were not born to be available to everyone. You were not designed to be a constant yes. You were meant to be intentional with your energy, your presence, your heart. Because the greatest gift you can offer the world is a version of you that is whole. And wholeness cannot exist where boundaries are breached. Protect your sacred space. Let that be your silent declaration, not of distance, but of dignity. Jealousy masquerading as concern. It starts with a raised eyebrow, a soft sigh, a phrase that sounds like love, but lands like doubt. Are you sure that's the right move? I just don't want you to get hurt. I'm only saying this because I care. But somewhere deep inside, you feel the shift. This isn't protection. It's projection. Jealousy doesn't always arrive with malice. Sometimes, it walks in dressed as advice. Sometimes, it smiles while secretly hoping you'll stay small enough to never threaten their comfort. The Stoics didn't speak of jealousy as loudly as they did of reason, but they knew its root. Envy, Seneca taught, was the result of comparison gone sour. It is the mind's rebellion against another's ascent. And when it cannot rise with you, it seeks to keep you grounded, with concern that cuts, not heals. It's important to understand. This behavior doesn't only come from strangers. In fact, it rarely does. It's the friend who's known you since you had nothing, who struggles now that you have something. It's the sibling who always saw you as the quiet one, now unsure how to process your growing voice. It's the colleague who once walked with you, now watching you sprint ahead. And because they're close, they know exactly how to disguise their envy as worry. They know the right emotional chords to play. They don't say, "You'll fail." They say, "I'm just worried you're moving too fast." They don't say, "I'm jealous." They say, "Don't you think you're changing?" But ask yourself, is it change they fear? Or is it your evolution without their permission? Take Mason, for example. He started a small photography business. Nothing flashy, just passion, time, and a lot of learning. Slowly it grew. Clients came. Confidence followed. And then came Liam. Liam, his oldest friend, began sending helpful articles about business failure rates. Constantly asked, "Are you really making enough to live?" Brought up old jokes in public about Mason's starving artist days. At first, Mason brushed it off. But the pattern became clear. Every milestone was met with a reminder of risk, not celebration. That's not concern. That's a covert operation. meant to dull your shine just enough to make someone else comfortable in your shadow. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And in moments like this, your reaction must be wise. Not defensive, not retaliatory, but discerning. Ask, does this person's pattern consistently bring doubt when I grow? Do they ask questions that invite reflection or inject hesitation? When I share my joy, do they meet it with celebration or with disguised critique? Jealousy masquerading as concern is an emotional sleight of hand. It trains you to believe their hesitation is your humility, that staying small is staying safe, that being proud is being arrogant. But humility is not denial, and your success is not a threat to anyone who truly loves you. So how do you respond? You don't explain your vision to those who are committed to misunderstanding it. You don't fight to earn the approval of those quietly rooting against your rise. And you certainly don't dim your light to soothe their unhealed wounds. You stand in your growth, not arrogantly, but unapologetically. You thank them for their concern, then keep building. Because concern that costs you your confidence is not love. It is fear wearing your friend's face. And your path, though it may narrow, was never meant to be walked by those who need you to shrink to feel seen. Step forward anyway. Let your light offend those who only feel safe in the dark. And no, their jealousy is not your burden to carry. It's their mirror to face. Chronic negativity. You could walk in with the sun on your face, a new opportunity blooming in your hands, and within 5 minutes, they'll remind you why it probably won't work, why the world is falling apart, why nothing really changes. They don't yell. They don't sabotage. They simply drain. Their presence feels like a slow leak in your spirit. Not explosive, but persistent. You leave the conversation feeling heavier than when you entered, unsure why your motivation dimmed, why your joy now feels unwarranted. This is the weight of chronic negativity. It's not just a bad mood or a rough day. It's a worldview, a lens, a quiet commitment to despair. And if you're not careful, you'll start seeing through their lens too. The Stoics were no strangers to adversity, but their response to it was not pessimism, it was perspective. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That was not denial. It was responsibility. But the chronically negative person does the opposite. They give all their power to what's broken, never to what's possible. They mistake cynicism for intelligence. They believe being unimpressed makes them wise. They carry a subtle pride in being realists, yet nothing ever seems to inspire them to act, to hope, to heal. You'll know them by their reflexes. Share a dream. They'll offer a worst-case scenario. Speak of change. They'll remind you why people don't really change. Tell them you're growing. They'll say, "Let's see how long that lasts." This isn't just discouragement, it's emotional contamination. And neuroscience backs it up. Studies on emotional contagion show that moods are highly transmissible. Your brain, through mirror neurons, subconsciously absorbs the energy of those around you. So if you consistently spend time with people anchored in negativity, your emotional baseline begins to shift, subtly, steadily, but surely. This doesn't mean abandoning those who are struggling. Compassion is a Stoic virtue, but it means knowing the difference between someone processing pain and someone living in it like a badge. Take Jamie, for instance. She had a coworker named Melissa. Melissa never shouted or started drama, but every conversation was shadowed. When the team celebrated wins, she pointed out missed details. When someone got promoted, she implied favoritism. Every Monday was a new complaint. Every Friday, a reminder that life was a cycle of disappointment. At first, Jamie tried to lift her up, but slowly, Jamie noticed she was dreading work, doubting her own enthusiasm. She felt guilty for feeling good. That's what chronic negativity does. It doesn't just rob the one who holds it. It quietly steals from everyone around them. So what do? You draw lines, not in anger, but in clarity. You reduce exposure, or if that's not possible, you reduce influence. You stop sharing your joys with those who flatten them. You stop seeking encouragement from those who've long abandoned hope. And you stop mistaking their heaviness as depth. Because heaviness is not wisdom. Pessimism is not maturity. And just because someone has chosen to live in gray, doesn't mean you owe them your light. Seneca said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Chronic negativity proves this daily. And the only antidote is presence, awareness. and distance when needed. You're allowed to be joyful. You're allowed to believe in your growth. You're allowed to protect your energy not just from chaos, but from the slow erosion of relentless gloom. Let their storm pass, but don't stand in the rain waiting for them to find the sun. Your mind is your temple, and you don't have to let every storm cloud in. Control disguised as love. They say they're doing it because they care. They check in constantly, where you are, who you're with, what time you'll be back. They want to help you make the right choices, to protect you from mistakes, to look out for you. And it all sounds sweet, until you realize you're not choosing anymore. You're complying. What feels like affection at first slowly begins to feel like a leash. Control, when dressed as love, is the most deceptive toxin of all, because it pretends to nurture while it suffocates. It uses intimacy as currency. It demands transparency in exchange for peace. And over time, you learn that your freedom is conditional, only granted when it doesn't threaten their comfort. Stoic wisdom teaches that love is only real when it honors autonomy. Epictetus wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Love, in its truest form, does not bind. It witnesses. It supports. It empowers. But when love becomes a form of surveillance, of correction, of domination cloaked in care, it is no longer love. It is possession. You'll know it not by what they say, but by what you feel you cannot do. You feel guilty for spending time alone. You hesitate before making a decision without their approval. You downplay your needs to avoid triggering their worry. And the most dangerous part? They often don't realize they're controlling you. They genuinely believe they're loving you, just deeply, fiercely, obsessively. But love that needs to monitor you, to manage you, to shape you, is rooted not in your value, but in their fear. Let's talk about Alicia. She was in a relationship with someone who adored her, loudly, texted her 20 times a day, showed up at her job unannounced, just to say hi, questioned her friendships, gave unsolicited advice on her wardrobe, her career, her goals. At first, it felt like deep interest, like protection. But over time, Alicia stopped attending events without checking in, stopped posting freely on social media, stopped growing, because her independence triggered anxiety in someone else. When she finally said, "I need space," he said, "I knew you'd leave. I was just trying to love you right." But that wasn't love. That was fear wearing love's mask. Seneca reminds us, true love is found in freedom. Love says, "I want you to be fully yourself, even if it's inconvenient to me." Control says, "I need you to be manageable, so I can feel secure." And that line, while subtle, is the one that separates devotion from domination. So how do you break free? First, stop justifying behavior that shrinks you. If you feel less like a partner and more like a project, it's time to reevaluate. Second, reclaim your decisions. Don't ask for permission to live your life. Share it, yes. Collaborate, absolutely. But don't surrender authorship. Finally, watch how they respond to your freedom. Real love may be challenged by your boundaries, but it won't punish you for setting them. Control disguised as love does not start with chains. It starts with flowers, with flattery, with phrases like, "I just care too much." But care without respect is not love. It's fear trying to control the inevitable changes that come with being human. So if you've been told that choosing yourself is betrayal, remember this. You are not walking away from love. You are walking back to it, starting with your own. And anyone who truly loves you will not stand in the way. They will walk beside you, at your pace, not theirs. Because real love doesn't need to own you to feel close. It trusts. It breathes. And most of all, it lets go without vanishing. We've walked through the quiet corridors of toxicity, the subtle manipulations, the smiling critics, the clouded companions, and the velvet chains. And perhaps, as we move through each part, something inside you stirred. A memory, a name, a question you've avoided for too long. Why have I tolerated what I never deserved? That's not weakness. That's awakening. Because the most dangerous thing about toxic behavior is not its loudness, it's its silence. It creeps in gently. It hides behind politeness, behind shared history, behind love. And before you know it, you've traded your clarity for chaos, your strength for survival, your peace for proximity. But the Stoics knew better. They didn't chase approval. They didn't mold themselves for comfort. They stood in stillness, firm in virtue, unwavering in truth. Marcus Aurelius wrote, The tranquility that comes when you stop caring what they say, or think, or do, only what you do. And that, right there, is your turning point. You do not need anyone's permission to reclaim your dignity. You do not need their understanding to set your boundary. You do not need their validation to walk away. All you need is a moment of self-honesty, a breath, a decision, a willingness to say, I am done mistaking pain for love. Because now you see the truth. Emotional manipulation isn't sensitivity, it's control. Passive aggressiveness isn't peace, it's punishment. Chronic criticism isn't care, it's corrosion. Boundary breaking isn't concern, it's entitlement. Jealousy isn't love, it's fear. Negativity isn't realism, it's surrender. And control, disguised as love, is not love. It's a leash. Let go. Not in bitterness, not with drama, but with grace. Release what no longer aligns. Protect the parts of you that still dream, still rise, still believe in something better. You were not made to absorb poison and call it patience. You were made to be clear, centered, and deeply alive. Seneca once said, as is a tale, so is life. Not how long it is, but how good it is what matters. Make yours a good one. One where peace is not a luxury, but a non-negotiable. Where silence isn't feared, but chosen. Where your worth isn't debated, but deeply known. And if you've been walking with someone who chips away at that peace, bit by bit, word by word, it's okay to step away. You don't owe anyone access to the most sacred parts of you. Not out of guilt, not out of habit, not even out of history. You owe yourself, your whole self. So take this video not just as a list of red flags, but as a mirror, a soft, powerful, silent call to return to yourself, to your strength, to your path. And if this reflection spoke to you, truly spoke to you, I invite you to pause, breathe, and share your thoughts below, not for attention, but for release. Let this be a space where your story matters. And if you've found clarity, peace, or truth in this message, consider subscribing to Stoic Now. This isn't just a channel. It's a sanctuary for souls who seek to live with quiet strength and sacred clarity. Like the video if it helped you. Share it with someone who might need it. And most of all, walk forward with this truth. You are not difficult for needing peace. You are not broken for wanting space. You are not selfish for choosing silence over chaos. You are simply remembering. And in that remembering, you are becoming free.